Also, your giraffe doesn't have a head in the photo.
Oh,
frame.
there we go.
Hey.
Do I do the whole thing like this? There's her head. Hi, this is 7-9 Media, and we are doing a little podcast situation since we are still in lovely quarantine due to Miss Rona. And so today we're going to be talking a little bit about the Asian American experience while in the midst of this crazy time in our society, in our American culture. And so just to introduce us, in case you didn't know, my name is Cassidy. I am a Chinese American. I was born here, but my parents were immigrants and they were younger. So that is who I am. Nicole.
Yeah, so I'm Nicole. I'm half Chinese. My mom's Chinese. She was born in LA though, so she's barely whitewashed. But anyway, yeah.
I'm Sarah. I am also Chinese. I was born in China, adopted by my dad, who's second generation Japanese, and my mom, who's white with some Scottish descent, is what she says. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. Today, we just wanted to talk a little bit about our Asian American identities, what it means to be in the Asian American community. So I guess the first question is, what does being Asian American mean to us?
Just shallow questions to start.
I nominate Cass to go first.
Why? Well, so I think definitely being Asian American is unique because I don't know about you guys, but I felt very in between cultures. I grew up in Irvine, California in Orange County, so there's hella Asians. It's probably around half Asian people and then half white people. And I was very comfortable there. I went to Chinese church, the Chinese Baptist Church of Central Orange County. It was great and I loved it there and I grew up there. So it was a huge shock to me when I went to Chapman University because there's so many white people that I was it was a bit of a culture shock. It was weird. I don't know why it was so hard for me, but going to Chapman, I was oh my gosh, how do I make friends? How do I talk to these people? How do I be and it's weird because, maybe people didn't really treat me differently, but I felt automatically different. And I felt weird. I was putting that label on myself when trying to interact with people. Obviously there wasn't outright, racism at Chapman or people aren't telling me things or calling me slurs or anything like that. But I think it is definitely a unique experience to be in a completely different environment. I had white roommates. It was hard for me to connect with them, and it was just difficult, maybe not because of what they were doing to me, but what I was telling myself. I was I don't belong here automatically because I was the only Asian person in my honors class or whatever. And so it was definitely a weird dynamic, and I wasn't sure how to navigate that, especially my first semester at Chapman for sure. But what are your thoughts?
So like I said in my introduction, I am full Chinese. I was adopted though, so actually I grew up with a much more Japanese influence, and so biologically I am Chinese, but if you ask me to identify ethnically and culturally, I would say culturally I'm much more Japanese American than Chinese American, which has always been an interesting point. I go to a Japanese church. We have two services. We have one in English and then one in Japanese. But I was growing up around friends who are full Japanese American, or at least half in some part. So that's the culture that I feel more comfortable in for sure. Language, food, culture, greeting, mannerisms, everything. I also took Japanese for I don't know how many years, but it doesn't show, so don't ask me to say anything. So it's kind of this interesting poll because for me, it's not just, do I feel more Asian? Do I feel more American? That poll, it's also, do I feel more on my Chinese side or do I feel more of my Japanese side? And that's been hard because I don't know. It's not that one is better than the other, but it's hard when I'm people are confused because I say I'm Chinese and yet I'm so clearly more comfortable in Japanese culture. So I guess you could say for me, it's it's kind of a niche corner within the whole Asian American experience. Within that circle, I still feel this divide, but also similarly to what Cassidy said, it's around Asians, sometimes I don't feel Asian enough, but then around like my white friends, I don't feel white enough because I'm clearly not. So, oh yeah, most people think I'm like Filipino, Cambodian, basically anything but Chinese. So that's always fun too. Racial ambiguity, but in the Asia realm. So, there's still that. I guess if we talk a little bit about Chapman, I so clearly remember walking into my first Fenestra Forum, which is like your first time where you meet other people in your major as like a small group and you meet orientation leaders. And I was like, there are no Asians. And then at the last second, my friend Rin, who I didn't know was Rin at the time, walked in and she sat right next to me. I was like, we both looked at each other, like introduced ourselves, and it was silent. And then she goes, I'm really glad to see another Asian in this room. And I was like, yeah, me too. And diversity has always been a hot topic in our college, the theater department. It's a work in progress. Definitely it's a bigger conversation, a larger conversation that's happening across the entertainment industry, which we'll get more into, I'm sure, later. But I definitely felt it even at the college level of like lack of representation in performing arts.
Okay, we're just gonna deal with the Sean-isms going on in the background. So speaking more from like I guess like a mixed biracial Papa perspective, like there was never like a point in my life, like I just always knew I was mixed. I don't know, like when you're a kid you like realize what ethnicity you are, but like anyway, like I feel like my parents did a good job of being like, these are both part of you. I grew up going to like a mostly Asian church. Like it was Chinese Presbyterian Church of Orange County, but then they changed the name to Journey Evangelical, so it'd be more diverse and more people would come that weren't just like Chinese people. I hung out with more Asian people and I was more comfortable like with my like Asian American community. Like I had some white friends, but like mostly I generally felt comfortable with like more Asian people because that's like who I was seeing every Sunday and regularly and everything like that. So talking about the Chapman thing, like it wasn't weird to me because I mean, it was a pretty like similar, like not genetic makeup, is that diversity makeup, whatever kind of thing, to the high school I went to, which was like an arts high school. So there was definitely like a lot of white people there. But so that wasn't like any kind of shock or anything. I had one Asian roommate, one white roommate, so it was all like going through it, same balance as me. I mean, I definitely feel like blessed to like grown up in SoCal because as my brother keeps bringing up, like mixed people are like 2.7% of like the demographic, thank you Cassidy, of the US, but like here in SoCal it's like super common to be mixed. Like it's not an unusual thing. Like nobody's gonna like talk about like two parents of different races like being married or anything, and if they are, like I don't know, they need to like move somewhere else. Identifying specifically like as Hapa, so like half Asian, half not Asian, has definitely been a big part of like my identity growing up. Like I feel like very normal and comfortable like with like my Asian friends I've like known for a while and feel comfortable. I don't feel like I'm like being judged or anything, but definitely like with new people, I definitely just want to make it like super clear that like I'm not just a white person, because sometimes when I'm talking like about stuff, I like could just seem like one of those people who like fetishizes Asian culture and that kind of thing. So I definitely like want to be super clear about that, and I was also definitely super hyper aware when I would like go to summer camp with my church and we were like the Asian church, and then I felt like people were like looking at me outside of my church being like, why is that white girl like with all those Asians? But other than that, it's definitely been like a fairly normal thing, I think. Kind of always get like the fun thing of people trying to like guess what you are, and I don't know, I like hearing what people think that I am, so it's like not like a offensive thing to me. I think it definitely depends on how you phrase it, because sometimes I don't know, when people phrase it could be like,
what are you?
yeah, like or like where are you from, like where are your parents from, and it's like, oh, that's like kind of a weird thing, like they're both from America. As long as people like ask in a more like, so like I was just curious like what ethnicity you are and that kind of thing is totally fine. But it's like weird when like a cashier at Kohl's and a customer comes up and it's like, are you half Chinese? My girlfriend's half Chinese, or like something like that. And it's like, I don't know how to respond to that. Like, and coming up being like, oh, you look like my niece, she's half Asian. It's like, okay, I don't know. Like, do you go up to like a black cashier and be like, oh, I got a black friend? Like, let's vibe like that. Like, it's just a weird thing to do. But anyway, I digress. So that's kind of my very convoluted, jumbled, tangential experience.
I think it's interesting because we all grew up in kind of like Asian churches. And so I'm just like wondering, what has your experience been in the Asian church, and has that like affected the way that you see God? Because it's interesting because since I've been going to the Chinese Baptist Church of Central Orange County since I was in like literally 3 years old. So I grew up thinking that only Chinese people could be Christian because yeah, because that's all I saw. Like, I don't know why, and it wasn't because I was like trying to be racist or anything, because that's not what it was. But it's because it was like up until, I don't know, like 4th grade, that I was like, oh my gosh, like Vietnamese people can be Asian, or I mean Vietnamese people can be like Christian, and like you know, like Latino people can be Christian. I was like, what? It's like my world was like was exploded. I was like, no freaking way. And so I don't know, I feel like that's one way that like growing up in Chinese church has affected my like worldview. So I'm just wondering, what about you guys, and like what about your view of God? If that makes sense.
I'll definitely jump onto the thinking only Chinese people could be Christian, because like most of the people like I grew up, it was mostly just like Asian and white people, so I wasn't even like thinking of other things. But generally, like through elementary, middle, like even into high school, like I knew white people who were Christians, but to me they always seemed like fake Christians. Like they were like the popular-ish people who like just went to church with their family. And it wasn't really until I went to like Chapman and was like in university, I was like, oh, like these like white people are like actually Christian. Like there's like actual like belief going on there. So I think it definitely kind of formed because I wasn't like interacting as much outside of like my own church like Asian bubble, like with other Christians really. So it was definitely kind of affected, I think, how I perceived other people.
I can't relate or be on the same train. I think of one, race or ethnicity only being Christian. I think one, because I already had that kind of duality happening of like I'm Chinese, but I go to a Japanese church, so kind of open it up. And then I was really fortunate to go to a high school that was also incredibly diverse. Incredibly is maybe a stretch, but significantly diverse. Let's go with that. And so I had friends who were Black and Latino and were Christian. And so I just kind of, that was a norm for me. And I don't think I ever considered, oh, like, could other races or ethnicities be Christian? I think what stood out to me more is how Asian culture influences church culture. I guess for mine in particular, everyone was family at church. And I know that that's not necessarily the case for every church, but I think a lot of that came from how we're like 3 generations of Japanese Americans at our church. And it was definitely based on that family thought and family idea that still is very present in my church today. And so like, I'm calling everyone auntie, uncle, grandma, grandpa. Like, I don't even think of it as like, these are like my church people. It's just like my second family. And so that's something that I feel heavily, because when my family goes to visit other churches, just random Sundays, I mean, obviously you're not going to have that feel because you're a guest there, but that family aspect to me is what sticks out of how Asian culture has influenced the way that my church just has raised kids and has done its thing. So I would say more of the relational way that church community happens was what I got most from it. But yeah.
Are there things that you've like misunderstood about about God, or about Jesus, or about like media? Even, I know those are like 3 different things, but, or I guess God and Jesus same. But like, but I think I definitely, my Asian American Christian identity specifically has definitely affected the way that I viewed like entertainment and media. In when I was growing up, oh, Hollywood is where kind of like they're all corrupt, they're all just like, they all just like want money, like that sort of thing. It's like you be a doctor or like a lawyer and that's it, you know. Like literally 2 weeks ago, beginning of quarantine, my mom was like, how come you don't like biology, like how come like, whatever, like why'd you do that? And so I think it's interesting, like, because I feel like that specifically has affected the way that I like grew up with some biases or like some assumptions about Hollywood or like entertainment, and like that's not the place where Christian people should go, or that's not the place where we go, like Asians go, like that sort of thing. And so I felt like maybe it wasn't explicitly like told to me that way, but I think that was maybe like an implicit thing that I just told myself. What have your experiences been with that?
I guess speaking more to like the whole like, cause I'll speak more to the Hollywood thing since that's like where I'm like working. I guess like that was never really a thing for me. I mean, my mom went to film school, so like pursuing arts and everything. Like my dad's the one who's a pharmacist, the white guy's a pharmacist. So like our church itself is a lot more kind of like second generational, third generation, a lot more, I guess, Americanized type deal. So I never really felt any of those like kind of readings. Um, if I felt like any like bias against Hollywood, I just saw it as more of like a general Christian thing of like being against Hollywood and not how like that's where all like the sinners are and like there's so much bad media and all that stuff. And if you're gonna go into Hollywood, you gotta make Christian movies and you gotta do that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, I never like saw that as like a result of being like in a Asian American church. I just always saw that as more of like a general church Christian, more conservative kind of bias feel.
Yeah, I'm probably in the similar boat to Nicole. When I was first looking at colleges and I was like, oh, what do you want to study? I was like, I'm going to go into theater. And they're like, oh, yeah, sure. And it wasn't like a don't do it. It was more, this was just like my general community around me of like, oh, like that's cool, but like maybe it's more like a side thing as opposed to making it like your main focus. So I've never had anyone just be like, absolutely not. That's a terrible idea. Go pick something, literally anything else. It was more of like a support and independence and financially supporting yourself was like definitely a priority. And I think also it's like kind of a side tangent, but I was like, I also don't understand what it's like to be a parent to like, or as a parent adjacent auntie or uncle, like wanting to see like your friends' kids and your kids like be able to support themselves. Like I can't relate to that. I'm not a parent. I think I also attributed a lot of what those comments were to just that parent role that I can't understand. And I don't know how much that was culture and I don't know how much that was just the parent role. The whole Hollywood thing and like not where Christians go, I have watched not so many because I've avoided them because they're bad. Like a lot of bad Christian movies. I'll just say it. And so I haven't seen a lot of them because I'm not sure what's gonna be at the end of that hour and 45 minutes of content. I will defend VeggieTales until I die, though. I will say that. I will say.
Yeah.
But obviously, children content, even in secular media, is in that similar vein. So I was like, that's great. But yeah, I was more of like if you're looking at more like adult and teen and other content, it's like, oh, like I don't know how those two are supposed to mesh, like my faith and not filtered content. I would say though that was a heavy consideration when I was looking at colleges because I was like, do I want to go to a Christian college where I know they've set up front that like content is filtered based on their values and scripture and things like that. So I was like, that was an interesting conversation. I was not heavily swayed by that. If anything, I think it made me want to go in the other direction towards a secular college. The real world isn't really gonna like filter things for you, so I'd rather like know and be exposed. And it's also important, there's so many important stories that I think need to be told and that can't get told if you have a lot of filters for content. So
I think it's interesting as Christians because like we want to make media and we want to make art that is like pleasing to God and something that would be like honoring to God and like build each other up. I guess my question is like, what do you think the balance is? How do you reconcile those two things where it's like we want to tell real stories that have like grit and that like are true and like that show I think that's I'm sorry. I think the church maybe confuses content that is like honoring to God or like bringing like encouraging to people as like things that are beautiful, things that are like pleasing or like easy to swallow sort of thing. But I think like at the same time we also have to remember like what are things that are like loving to people, what are things that are going to transform them into a mindset or like a lifestyle that is parallel to what Jesus walked, like to the lifestyle that Jesus walked. And so I think like it's hard because because a lot of like Christian movies, there's a big market for it because churches like to buy out theaters and like watch it. You know what I mean? But it's also, yeah, they do so well. They literally, if you look up the box office, like to God's Not Dead or whatever, like they do so well.
I have no idea.
Yeah, it's really weird, but like people like those things, and I fear that like because of that, it's not necessarily good art, but it's something that like this niche of audience will like consume, and so like let's make more of this. You know, it's like not gritty. It's not real to me, and sometimes it's not even like godly. Like if I'm gonna be honest, you know, or like it preaches like a gospel that is not like the prosperity gospel or something that is like not lined up with what's actually in the Bible.
I think what I see a lot of is like a lot of content tries to make it real and gritty, but it always has to be tied up with like a nice bow. Like there always has to be that like super triumphant victory. And I think the reality is that so many stories that people have don't have that shiny, nice ending. And I think that's always the sore spot for me in particular about some Christian media films and things that I see. I think also because maybe this is the very secular part of me talking, I don't know, but it's like to me someone's story should be compelling enough, like whether that's secular or whether that's Christian, because everyone has a part of themselves in their lives that they're still growing and they're still working on. So I think content needs to reflect that. And like I think I keep referring to The Shack because it's probably one of the best ones I have seen in that Christian, and like he went through a lot of sadness and a lot of hardship, and there's a lot of really cool moments in that movie. But I think the question I always ask myself is, if that movie didn't end the way that it did, would it still have been considered a quote unquote Christian movie? Would it still have been quote unquote a good Christian movie? Like, and to me, it's like, if you hear his story and you hear the way that he's wrestled with God and all of that, like, isn't that enough? Because isn't that what the rest of us are doing anyways? And so if you look at movies that aren't specifically in the Christian genre and you see these struggles that people are going through, it's like, well, shouldn't that also be considered Christian content because it's someone's life, it's someone's struggle and hardship, and maybe God's not directly involved, but also isn't that the point to like know those people, know their stories, and be able to walk with them in that, even if it's a fictional character, even if it's someone you don't actually know. Like the whole point isn't to be in a Christian huddle. And I think even starting something as simple as like watching movies to learn a story that has absolutely nothing to do with the church, I think like as maybe shallow as that sounds, I think it actually is a practical thing to do. And specifically, I guess as a more in the acting performance realm, it's like I don't want to take just secular roles or just characters that are Christian, because I found I've developed a lot more empathy by taking on characters who have, say, very ungodly, very not loving, very harsh, brutal, concerning things. And it's like, well, there's so many people like that in our real world. And so you can't play a character unless you have empathy for them. You don't have to like them, but you do have to love them. And that's the only way that you can do a role successfully. And so I think that to me, as a very specific way, has translated to why it's important to watch movies and characters that are not Christian and how that applies to my actual life outside of my craft.
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely think, yes, I'm not a big fan of Christian movies, if you can't tell. Like, I generally avoid watching them. I think one of my main issues with Christian movies is I feel like a lot of the intent behind it, like, obviously Christian audiences, like, will watch it. I feel like sometimes people want you to, like, go into making Christian movies, or, like, think the intent behind it is to, like, reach out to people outside of, like, Christians and reach out and like convert people or open people's minds, but nobody besides Christians are going to watch these movies. One of the great things about film is like this huge outreach it has internationally across like gender, race, religion, all that. But with like a lot of these Christian movies, like it's a very specific population that's watching it who already believes this kind of stuff. So it just kind of feels reiterative. And I think that's why like a lot of Christian movies feel the same, because they're like preaching to the choir and all that kind of stuff. Because like I myself, definitely my interests are definitely like stuff that would not be Christian. Like I love Game of Thrones and Westworld and lots of things on HBO that are not okay for like Christian stuff. And definitely like a lot of the stuff I write, like there's murder. People swear because like I know that most people aren't like me and have my beliefs, and I feel like it's important to represent people, and they're very wide ranging in their beliefs and in their actions, and in like how they speak and how they behave. And I don't think showing just one kind of person is a healthy way to form your worldview, because then you'll just kind of be shocked going out into the real world and think, oh, this person, like I need to stay away from them because they're not like these people I've been watching who are like all good and godly. Film's like a great way to like expose yourself to different cultures and to different ideas and beliefs and like experiences. You can definitely kind of spread a more kind of like godly message, or like intertwine like themes that Christianity like holds important, like love for like all people, like incorporating that into like a theme of your story, or just like having someone who behaves like in a more godly way in a story that might not necessarily be the most godly kind of thing. Being able to like incorporate things that aren't explicitly Christian but are like Christian beliefs into content can be like a really great way to like express your beliefs and expose them to people, even without them knowing that they're going in and watching something that is like a kind of Christian belief. But then they might like be like, oh, I really like this filmmaker and like what they stand for, and then they like research into you and like, oh, you're a Christian, that's like interesting, like a thing you can like look into. That's also like a great way, like with a lot of actors, like Chris Pratt is like a Christian, but he's like super mainstream and people love him across like all religions. The more people you can expose yourself and your content to, whether or not that content is explicitly godly, so long as you're like holding yourself in a godly way and like incorporating some positive themes amidst all the murder and sex and everything else that's going on that's like popular media, I feel like it's chill. That's like a better way to do some kind of outreach. Does that make sense?
Just to add on really quick, it's like my question is, if Christians want to change mainstream media and they want to be involved in that, you can't do that unless there's actually Christians in secular media, like producing, writing, acting, directing, everything, because so much of what content is influenced by the people who are actually working on it, which sounds really like obvious to say, but sometimes I think we miss that disconnect. Even the PA has an influence on what's going on, and it's like also even the way that you act on set and behave on set, that can set a standard for across the industry in general. So maybe you're not changing content right away, but you're changing how people are caring for each other while creating, because set's rough. I say from very little experience, but from what little experience I have, I can attest.
It reminds me of like the story of Esther, how like she had to kind of adjust to the like the Persian culture in order to get into the room. Sometimes that has to happen. It's like we have to adjust, because otherwise if she wasn't there, then an entire race would have been like eradicated, you know? And so I think it's important to obviously like stand your ground and like know your beliefs and know who you are and like God, but also like understand that it takes something to get into the room in the first place, you know? Don't 100% like compromise your beliefs. Like that's not what I'm saying either. Because I think having firm beliefs and like still being in that room is one of the most like faithful and strongest things that you can do. And so, yeah. And so I don't know if that resonates with you all, but that's how I kind of think about it. So that is our podcast on our Asian American experience this week. Next week, we're going to talk about representation in media and what 7-9 is doing there. So join in. It was fun talking to you, or talking to you guys, I guess. I don't know, we don't have like an audience. But yeah, it was great. We're going to do it again. Come back next week, and we're going to have fun. Bye!